Morning, everybody. I hope you intended to be in the loyalty track this morning, or at least for this talk, because that is where you are. And I'm really glad that you guys showed up and have you here today. My name is Barry Kirk, and I work for a company called Merits, which does loyalty and motivation programs. And Gabe asked me today to come in and just kind of give a kickoff to the loyalty talks that will be going on this morning, throughout the morning and the day here in this space. So what I thought I would do is actually not give like a full-blown talk, but just give you guys some thought starters today, particularly on where I, as somebody who spends a lot of time working with Fortune 100 companies in the loyalty space, some things I think are really interesting that are happening around design and around the experience for consumers that anybody who's thinking about retaining or marketing to consumers should be paying attention to. So in some cases, it's kind of like when BJ Fogg said yesterday, hey, I'm going to give you guys an idea that isn't fully worked out yet, but I'm sharing it with you. That's a bit what I'm going to do this morning for the next few minutes, is to share 3 ideas that I'm playing around with, that we're playing around with at Merits, that I think do have legs in the loyalty space, and encourage you to find one that grabs you and do something with that. So I want to back up a little bit, though, and say that before I was a loved and revered and reviled person in the loyalty marketing space, I was a kid growing up in the very small town of Jefferson City, Missouri. And Jefferson City is actually the capital of the state of Missouri, where my company Merits is located. They're in St. Louis, Missouri, a much bigger city. But I grew up in a very small town, and the one thing I could really say about myself as a little kid was that I was just a huge nerd. Like, I spent all my time reading comic books and going to science fiction movies and playing with my Star Wars action figures. So just a hand count, look around the room. How many of you identify with, when you were a kid, you would have identified yourself as a nerd or a geek of some kind? Okay, come on, people. It's a gamification conference. I know what you were like as kids. So everybody, I'm sure, at some level relates to that in some way. But I was definitely like a major nerd, and that was a big part of my identity, still is today. And to some extent, that really shaped the kind of marketer I became. And part of that was because of the philosopher that influenced me most as a kid, who really set my frame for the way I looked at the world, my vision of life, who really had an impact on how I saw other human beings, how I related to the world. And of course, that philosopher, I'm just going to get up here and do this manually, was Mr. Spock. Because I was a huge Trekkie. And of all the characters that I should have loved, it probably should have been Captain Kirk, because we share the same namesake. But in fact, I love Spock. And what I loved about Spock when I was this little geeky kid growing up in a small town was just this sense that he knew the answer, and the sense that everything was logical in his world, or should be logical, that he didn't lie, he didn't have a lot of emotion, and that was a great way to go through life, was to really see the world as a very logical place where if you just got the right data, you could make the right decisions, and you could really be superior to anybody else if you took that worldview. So I don't think it's a surprise that because that was the influence I had as a kid, that when I got into the marketing world, I went into a field of marketing that for a long time has really been focused on very logical, rational constructs. And that's the loyalty space. The loyalty space has really for decades been built on this idea of the rational economic model. This idea that consumers are weighing all their decisions around brands based on maximizing their economic result, their economic benefit. And so if you build a program or an experience or a pricing model that says you're getting the best deal with me, then consumers will always choose you. And in fact, if you look at almost any loyalty program in the market today, they're all really based on that foundational principle of the rational economic model. That if I create the right do this, get that structure, with some sort of ideally financial reward on the other end, on the get that end, that I'm going to win loyalty. I'm going to get consumers to choose my brand over the competitor. And that's actually been a pretty effective model for decades in the loyalty space, until it wasn't effective anymore. And in fact, there's a lot of data right now that shows that that model, that rational economic model, that points and rewards, do this, get that, is in decline. The surest sign we have of that is industry-wide data that's for like 3 to 4 years now been consistent, that shows that people are enrolling in loyalty programs at record numbers, but they are engaging at a declining rate. So they're showing up, but they're not finding much there of interest. And I think the reason that is that this rational economic model that we built everything on is actually wrong. In fact, everything that we've learned in the last 10 to 20 years coming out of particularly the field of neuroscience, which is the field that lets us look into people's brains and see how they respond to particular stimuli, has taught us that we are not predominantly rational beings. That in fact, most of our decisions are made on an emotional basis, not a rational one. And in physiological terms, every decision that you make, that we make in this room at any moment, is actually being filtered through the emotion centers of the brain first and the rational centers of the brain only after that. And so the idea that we are influencing behavior by creating some very rational construct around economic benefit, it's falling down because we're learning it's not the way people think about the world. In fact, the way people think about the world looks a lot more like this. That we are dominantly feeling people, looking for human-to-human connection, and when we think about brands, we're thinking the same way about it. So a lot of what I do in the space of loyalty, and a lot of where I see it heading now, is shifting from the rational economic model into human-to-human connection, which is feels good for marketers who talk about it, but it also is really based on science. It's based on what we know now about how people process choices and decide what is important to them and what they filter out. So just an interesting example of that, one thing we do at Merits is social intelligence. Has anybody here done any work in social intelligence research? Familiar with it? So it's a pretty emerging area of customer research, and it's something I actually believe is going to be huge for the loyalty space in the next few years. But it's essentially this idea that you can go out onto the social grid and take all these conversations that are happening, and you can scoop them up into a database, millions and millions of conversations that consumers are having that are publicly available, and run them through an algorithm and begin to learn things about what people are saying to each other, and in particular for us about brands and brand loyalty. And so we actually did a study through our research division earlier this year where we just said, let's look at every conversation that consumers on the social grid, so Facebook, Twitter, and also on blogs and forums, and what are they saying there? What are they saying? What are they talking about when they talk about brand loyalty? Are they saying things about price or coupons or discounts? What are the conversations? And so if you've never seen one of these grids before, the way you read this scatter plot is these are the things people were talking about, and I'll do a little zoom in here in a second. But the grid works like this. On the bottom, we have a metric called sentiment, which is, was the conversation positive or negative? So it's positive to that end and negative on this end. And up and down on this axis, it's was the emotion level low? Were they using low emotion words, or was the emotion level high emotion words, right? So the way you read a graph like this is the stuff that you should be really worried about is the stuff on this end in the upper left, right? So it's high emotion, but it's really negative. So that's the stuff that PR companies use social intelligence for. They're like, it's kind of like the oh shit stuff. Like, things are not going good for the brand today. This is what we see trending. Somebody get out there and take care of it. From a loyalty standpoint, my preference is to focus on the other side of one of these scatter plots, which is what is on the positive sentiment side, even if it's low emotion, because we would call that table stakes. So stuff that would show up down here, the lower corner, that would be table stakes. The stuff that's moving up into the upper right are the things that we ought to see. Well, what are people talking about there? Because we ought to grab that and do something with it because that's what's important to them. And this was just one finding of the study, but one really interesting thing we found out was that when people talk about brand loyalty, they're talking about all kinds of other crazy stuff in the exact same conversation. You can see just the variety of conversation topics that were occurring there. Some really had us scratching our heads like, why were they even talking about that in the context of a brand conversation? And one cool thing with social intelligence is you can actually dig down into those conversations and see what they were. But the finding that I took from that in particular was when I talk about being loyal to a brand, I do not stop being the human being I was 5 minutes before. I am still having the same conversations, concerns, interests, values when I'm talking about brands I choose to do business with. And so if brands want to talk to me, the human being who filters everything through emotion first, those conversations need to start sounding more and more human and less like they've been emerging from the rational economic model. if you got a chance to hear a really great talk yesterday by Bill Hanifin, who's one of my gurus in the loyalty space, he talked about the need to even change our words. Because I think Bill really gets this idea too, and he's saying one thing we have to do is dump the old words that we use when we talk about consumers, which I agree with. Words like transact and retain, target, grow, reward, because while we may some of that stuff is good, it's actually kind of what we do to customers in not a very positive way. And so I actually took this right from, hey Bill, I took this right from Bill's talk yesterday because it really, really spoke to me that, yeah, these are the words we use when we talk about consumers, but they really come out of that rational economic model. And wouldn't it be more enlightened to kind of change our language to words like this? Again, words that Bill shared with us yesterday. And my favorite one, frankly, is tease, because that just opens my brain up into all kinds of interesting things I think I could do in a loyalty program with my most profitable and most devoted customers. But also words like respect and delight. So changing our language, I think, is a big part of what we need to do. So with that frame in mind, I just want to share 3 quick thoughts today about the things I think fit into this new model that we should all be paying attention to and sort of migrating toward. One of them is a model that we actually shared in the workshop that we did 2 days ago here, which is the 4 tiers of loyalty that I talk about with clients a lot. And I encourage clients to look at this tiering structure and say, which kind of loyalty are you giving? Inertial loyalty, which is the loyalty that I have because it's just too much trouble to go somewhere else. Mercenary loyalty, which is the rational economic model version, which says, hey, if I pay you enough, you'll stay loyal, unless somebody else wants to pay you a little bit more. True loyalty, which is resisting the competitive offer. So there's something else going on there, maybe ideally emotional, that helps me stick around. At the top end is this thing that we call cult loyalty. And cult loyalty is the loyalty that you get when I, as the consumer, have my own brand, and I take your brand and make it part of my brand. So we're the same thing. I become a blank guy, right? I become an Apple guy because your brand and my brand are synonymous. And what I've told clients for quite a few years is, hey, true loyalty is a strategy. You can achieve that with a very specific tactical approach to how you engage customers, but cult loyalty is an aspiration. You can't create it. But it has occurred to me recently that that's kind of a cop-out. That actually what we all ought to be aspiring to is cult loyalty. When I and the brand become the same thing. When your brand is speaking to me and my value system in the direct enough way that I say, that's who I am as a person. So one thing I would say to us this morning is I think we need to spend a lot more time with this notion of cult loyalty. How do we connect in a way where we're not bribing customers, or we're not just trying to get them to say, yeah, I'll stick around even though you don't have the lowest price, but how do we really figure out who customers are and say, hey, as a human being, does this brand fit who you are, right? So like one good example would be Chipotle and the way they're playing around with the idea of sustainable, cage-free, all the things that they're doing to say, hey, we're a different kind of business in the way we provide our food product to you. And if that speaks to you and your value system, then you should be a Chipotle person because that's who we are and that's who you are, and so we bring that together. So while I still say cult loyalty is an aspiration, I think that's what we ought to be shooting for now because that's where real human connection occurs. So one way I see us doing that is taking a particular model that we talked about in our workshop this week that I actually developed out when I was working in the gamification field for a few years. And the first 2 stages of this model say the first thing you have to do to get people to pay attention to brand is you've got to create disruption. You've got to get them to pay attention to you in a different way than they normally do because they've already made a lot of assumptions about who you are. But past disruption, what you got to do is you've got to create habit. We've had a lot of discussion at the conference about habit. BJ Fogg, like awesome talk that I really enjoyed and what he was teaching us about it. But here's the problem I have with habit or conversations about habit. Most loyalty programs get stuck there. They get stuck with this notion of I've got things I need you to do and I just need to get something in front of you so you just start doing it over and over again until you stop thinking about doing it. You just do it, right? Swipe a credit card, make a purchase, whatever it is they want you to do. The other thing I will tell you, if gamification is of interest of yours, this is where about 98% of gamification strategies get stuck. They think we just have a bunch of behaviors. What behaviors do you want people to do? And we'll just keep turning the dials on the game mechanics and get people to do that till the point arrives where we don't even have to do much anymore because they just do that thing. I think that is a model that shows that we're still stuck in that rational economic construct, where we don't want people thinking about the brand experience because who knows what they might do when choice comes into the experience. But for me, if we're going to have cult loyalty, we actually have to move to the next stage in that process, which I call ritual. And the difference between habit and ritual is one is mindless. I just do it without thinking. I tie my shoes in the morning to go to work. I don't think about it. I don't decide whether to tie them or not, right? Ritual is very conscious and choice-based. It's me deciding that when I encounter that brand, there's something about the experience of it that is part of my daily existence that I am looking forward to, and I've sort of created as my own little niche in that brand experience. So for me, when I go to work every day, it'd be very easy when I jump on the highway to go to Merritt's to stop at the corner convenience store and buy a cheap cup of coffee and drink that on the way in on my commute. But I don't. I drive about 8 minutes out of the way to go to a Starbucks to get a venti soy vanilla latte with only 2 pumps of syrup and pay way too much for a cup of coffee because that makes me feel good in the morning and makes my day start off right. That is a ritual. I choose to spend more. I choose to go out of my way. I choose the exact version of that product I want because that is part of who I am and how my day works. So for me to move into cult loyalty, we've got to move into a ritual-based environment. And so my suggestion to us today as we're thinking through this loyalty track is what opportunities do we have in the brand experience to enable brand rituals? And that has a lot to do with how much choice you give people and how they interact with the brand. Are you actually encouraging people to find their way to experience your brand and to make it part of their own identity? That's where cult loyalty comes in. Are you encouraging that as part of the experience? To get out of that model that allows us to do that, though, we've got to sort of dump this, which we talk about a lot, which the loyalty industry uses these terms earn and burn very frequently. Earn is, earning points. And burn is what do you do with those points? How do you get rid of them, right? So you get a hotel room, you get a free flight, you redeem for an iPod out of somebody's reward catalog. And that's all well and good, but it doesn't actually move us anywhere closer to cult loyalty or to helping people develop rituals. To do that, what we have to do is add this third term, which we call yearn. Earn, burn, yearn. And what is yearn about? Well, yearn's about me. Yearn's about you, right? Yearn is about who is the consumer, understanding them, but not just understanding them demographically, because we all do that. Anybody here is a marketer. We know how to take data and cut it all up and understand. It is who am I as a person? Who do I want to be? What are my values? Where am I heading in life? And how do my brand choices become part of that? How do they reflect that part of my experience? So this leads to my just third thought starter I have for you guys today, which is where do we see that expressing itself and where do we kind of play into that? And it's a thing that I've really played around a lot with lately is this idea that we have become this selfie nation. And if you guys haven't done it yet, these are all photos from the Big Door booth where you can actually create your own selfie and get their sunglasses. So this came right from the conference yesterday. Is this notion that we've become a collection of consumers who love this idea of the selfie. And we used to think this was just millennials, but it's not anymore. I mean, grandmas are as much into selfies as teenagers are, right? And I think that's largely because millennials, who have now become the largest consumer group in the United States, millennials have influenced the rest of us in very significant ways. Where to us now, all of us are into this idea of connecting, commenting, or adding to an experience that somebody has created for us to become part of, and absolutely curating, right? Because what is curating? Curating is my brand. What I choose to put out into the world in the social grid is my brand. That brand that we want to connect to your brand, right? So what I suggest we do to play around with this idea is we actually dump another old phrase from the loyalty and motivation space that used to be used a lot. And this phrase is trophy value. So we used to talk about trophy value a lot, especially in motivation programs. We'd say, hey, if somebody's in a sales incentive program, and they're the top dealer for the year, and they use their points to redeem for a big screen TV, they're going to put that TV on a wall, and whenever anybody comes over, they're going to say, hey, check out this big screen TV. Oh, it's an awesome TV. Well, I got it because I was the top sales guy last year, right? That's trophy value. And I argued for many years inside my own company that, hey, that works great for motivation programs with salespeople and employees, but that means nothing in the loyalty space. I mean, why would I think of it as a trophy when basically a lot of times, why do I get a reward in a loyalty program? It's because I'm spending too much money with that brand, right? So, oh yeah, I overspent on my credit card. Look at the trophy I got, right? Nobody's going to do that. So for a long time, I said, yeah, you guys can use that on that side of the industry, but not on my side of it. So I do think there's a better word for us to use, though, in the loyalty space, which is this one, selfie value, right? If you go out and Google Starbucks selfie, you'll come back with like 1 million hits of people showing pictures of them in Starbucks, or showing when they finally received their gold card, or just some cool thing that was written on their cup. And what does that tell you? It tells you there was some human-to-human connection, some moment, some maybe reward, some interaction, some leveling up that became important enough to that person that they said, I have to share it with other human beings. And I don't think it has to just be like a photograph thrown out on, Instagram. It could be that, but it could just be some experience that was so powerful to me that I decided I want to share it with another person. Anybody here in Panera's loyalty program? Panera Bread? I love Panera. I go there like every day for lunch. I don't like their loyalty program, although Bill says it's successful, so I'm sure it is. I just don't like it because it's too much surprise and delight. But I went in there the other day, and when I made a purchase, they said, oh, you have a reward waiting, because you never know when you have one. It's all a surprise. And I said, okay, what is it? And I figured it was a bagel or something. And the girl looks at the counter thing, and she said, it looks like you have free coffee for the entire month. She goes, but that doesn't sound right because I've never seen that before. So she had to go back in the back and get her manager, and he came out, and he's like, oh, yeah, I've never seen that before. He goes, I guess you got free coffee for a month. And I'm like, oh, my God. Now, I have told like 20 people that story, and yet I never redeemed for a cup of coffee once during that entire month. I didn't care about the free coffee. I cared about, like, not just that it was a really interesting reward, but that those people behind the counter seemed just as sort of, like, bowled over by it as I was. It was like a human connection that I had with them that they probably don't even know, right, that meant something to me. But that was selfie value. Something that I said, hey, look, I'm such a good customer. They gave me this thing. I was probably the first person you ever heard of who had it. That's meaningful. So what I would say to us today is, what are you creating in your brand experiences that has selfie value? What is that moment, that interaction, that special reward that is so impulsive to me, so reaching into me as a human being that I want to share it out into the world? So as you listen to other talks today about loyalty marketing, I just encourage you guys to kind of keep these 3 ideas in your head and see how you take what these other smart people are going to share with you about their experiences and how they're applying loyalty and gamification to these notions of cult loyalty, where my loyalty to the brand is about my brand and that brand coming together into something new and interesting. Around then having rituals with that brand where give me some choice so that my interaction with the brand has a lot more to do with what I want to do with it than what the brand is telling me I can do with it. And then finally, what are those special moments in there then that once we've established that connection, that I'm absolutely compelled to share out with everybody else? I think then when we achieve those 3 things, we're going to see the loyalty space completely change into something new, maybe even overnight. And I would say if we don't do it, we choose to stay with that old rational economic model, my belief is that my old friend Mr. Spock would say that would be highly illogical. Thank you.